Hey, Warlock Rock, give me a word.
Let's go with coffee.
Dragon Warrior, can you give me a word?
Everyday Tiger Wizard, let's go with Bogwitch.
Awesome, let's make the swamp hut of the caffeinated Bogwitch together.
What's gonna happen in this swamp?
Well, obviously, trouble is brewing a latte.
Do you love game design and seeing the guts of how RPG adventures are made? Listen to the Epic Levels Mad Dungeon podcast, where guests from the world of role-playing games join us to create original and super fun content for your table.
This is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the founder and publisher of Unwinnable. He's never cut up his life into pieces because he's got plenty of other options, Stu Horvath.
Oh. Ow.
That was a reach. That was a reach with that joke, but like... I don't know which other way to go. It was either that or like a Joe's Apartment reference, and I just felt like I could land the plane better with the Papa Roach joke. But
oh man, that I don't know how. I don't know. That's it, folks. See you next week.
Show's over. Yeah, I feel like there's a very specific segment of our audience that's going to be like, "Oh shit," and the rest it's going to go over your head. And when you Google it, you're going to be real mad at me. But anyway, how you doing today, Stu?
Pretty good. How are you?
Can't complain. And we're talking about Reach of the Roach God, right?
Oh my goodness, we are. Yeah. Apparently, I got to roll this back a little bit as usual. Apparently, the Mirrorverse that I came from, we did a podcast episode on the Thousand Islands series of zines. This universe that we're currently inhabiting, I can't find it. So for some reason, my previous incarnation and you never covered it on the podcast. That seems like a weird thing. I think that just because it has a chapter in my book and I posted about it, I feel like I've already done a podcast, but we haven't.
I think I know what happened.
What do you think happened?
Because I remember doing that episode. I think when we did it, I think that was like the start of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And just stuff was going crazy. So it might exist somewhere. I remember doing it. It wasn't like I had the same dream kind of, kind of a thing. But in my brain, we released that episode.
Right. I think that this is proof that there are parallel worlds.
Yeah. I wish we could like salad bar that shit and pick the good stuff from both, put them together as one. But here we are.
It's true.
So you have Reach of the Roach Gods in your hand.
I do. I kickstarted it. This is a Kickstarter copy. Because of that, I have no idea how you, if you did not kickstart it, can achieve a physical copy of the book. I'll talk to the folks behind the book to find out when they're going to be widely available. I'm pretty sure it'll be through Spearwitch, but we'll see. And apparently I'm one of the earlier folks who've gotten a copy. They're shipping now and arriving now. So Reach of the Roach God was kickstarted last year, the year before. And it is a large hardcover book that is sort of the newest evolution of the Thousand Islands series. The previous volumes in the series, and I think there's 7 formal ones, and then a book of essays, and then 2 art zines. They're all zines, and they're very interesting because they're completely rules free.
That's cool.
There isn't even a lot of implied rules. There's some tables of random stuff, particularly when you get to markets of like the cool stuff that you could find there. And there's sort of a narrative approach to magic systems and effects that you can easily translate into mechanics. But there isn't a lot of even sort of acknowledgement that these are for a role-playing game. There's no terminology. The stuff isn't presented to you in a way that makes the material easy to use. I find this really appealing because it really veers into the poetic, which is super rare for RPGs. It reads like a really wonderful travelogue or travel guide to this place that is sort of effortlessly strange. It's rooted in, of course, non-Eurocentric, folklore of Malaysia and the archipelagos in the east there. So everything is very different, but not exoticized. It's really interesting and exciting and inspiring to kind of see the product of another culture's folklore mined and reinterpreted and turned into a fantasy world in the way that we have effortlessly done for, decades with our own European mythology and folklore. It's really cool to see it, and it's really interesting to see how unusual and different it is. You start with different ingredients, you get different dishes. But as I said, there's a lack of real game structure in the zines. Again, I don't mind that. I think it's a really great approach to world building for role-playing games. If you just discard mechanical concerns, I think that you get really good stuff, interesting stuff when you're not having to worry about how does this work with dice and numbers, especially the way that ZXU's writing kind of nestles right in with Monkao's really gorgeous pencil art, intricately detailed, effortlessly creative, so many weird things. Like, just for example, one of the zines features warriors of an island culture who they're knights, and you know that they're knights because they have had their heads surgically removed and replaced with the prows of warships.
Oh yeah, buddy.
Like, freaking weird. Like, just really hard, even for like fantasy, where like we're used to a certain amount of like what is going on. Like, stuff like that is really strange to me.
Well, I mean, like in fantasy, there's like missionary weird, and then there's weird. Like, I see a lot of stuff in fantasy where it's just really variations on a theme, and people are like, oh, it's weird because it, by definition, would be considered something weird, like, you know, like a weird science, a weird Western, weird this, weird that, you know, because it's off kilter to what the norm would be considered for that genre. But it's still very much weird missionary. Like, all right, it's happening. It's sexy. We're doing this. But then there's weird. Like, what you are describing is weird. Like, genuinely, you know, I've never seen anything like that. That is stuff that I would imagine seeing in a book that would have a lot of prose in it, where like someone is speaking about a headier, pun intended, type environment and aesthetic than you normally find in a regular fantasy book.
Right. And this is super weird. But it all it's not weird for weirdness sake. Like, Troika definitely strays into weird for weirdness sake, I think. And
agree.
This is all very curated to extract or elicit specific moods and atmospheres and feelings from the player or reader. Like, there's one of the zines is about these living puppets. Again, something I really had a hard time wrapping my head around. They are like, don't think of them as puppets. Think of them more as like hobby horses. Like, it's like a stick with a horse head kind of on it. And like, they're sentient, but they can't do anything on their own. They have to have somebody like use them. And when you do, you get their strength. So like, if you put the horse, you get on the hobby horse, all of a sudden you have the strength of a horse and you can carry stuff like as if you were a horse. It's really strange. And then, you know, there's this symbiotic relationship between the people riding the puppets and the puppets. There's a lot about servitude and free will and commerce and capitalism and colonialism. There's all this stuff. There's thematic stuff that is baked into the weirdness. That's all very interesting.
So basically, like, what I'm hearing is we dropped acid and we put on a Bob Dylan album and things went wildly wrong.
I mean, I think that's a better description for Troika. There is a methodical vibe to the weirdness here that makes me think that there are no drugs involved. Maybe.
Who's to say?
Anyway, Reach of the Roach God is a lot more, I don't want to say ambitious, because I think the whole project is ambitious, but this is of a scale and scope that is bigger than the previous zines. For starters, it is beginning to look a lot more like a traditional role-playing publication. There's still no rules. It is still explicitly agnostic in its rules. You know, you could use anything for this as long as you kind of tinker with it to make it work. And you can see that in the way that the stuff is sort of presented. It is now, there's a framework of adventure. There's a storyline here. The Roach God wants in. Everybody else, even if they don't know it, doesn't want the Roach God in any kind of power or have any more influence in this world. And this is about sort of the tension between, you know, the Roach God trying to gain influence and power in the world, and the players and their allies trying to stop it. So there's 6 adventures, and then there's sort of a source book at the end. Just seeing Thousand Islands stuff presented in the package of an adventure is interesting and new. Zedek had written Lorne's Song of the Bachelor, which I think is a fantastic, very similarly flavored adventure, like a formal adventure. So you could sort of see what Thousand Islands adventure would be like, but we hadn't gotten it until just now. And this really plays out as a series of linked adventures that really become a campaign of players versus the machinations of the Roach God.
That's cool, man. That is so cool.
So first things first is Munchau's art. I hate it in the good way, because I think that he intends for me to hate it. I don't like centipedes, man. And
I know, man. I know. Brother, I know.
And I mean, I'm not fond of roaches either. There's a lot of roaches in this book, and they're gross. And
yeah,
Munchau really captures that grossness. But his illustrations of centipedes are fucking awful. Like, just absolutely, I can't. The pages that they're on, I have difficulty engaging with because they're there. That's how good his art is.
Yeah, it's not your daddy's glowworm,
And because his art is so good and he's so on his game in this book, he pushes the yuck factor so far. I'm actually like I'm a little uncomfortable with some of the stuff, and I don't know how I would run it, because it skeeves me so, which is great, because how often do you read a role-playing book and be going, oh my gosh, this is so gross. Like, I don't know how to do this. This is so gross.
But that's what great art is supposed to be. And that is, to me, the barometer of what separates good art from great art, is that it evokes a visceral response.
Right.
And I felt the same way when I look at like a lot of Russ Nichols art, you see certain things that stick out to you and you're just like, that makes me uncomfortable, but it's not bad. It makes me feel like alive, and that's cool. I mean, I don't want to look at it because I'm so like grossed out by that kind of stuff, but like I know that if I saw it, I'd be grossed out in like a good way, and I think that's important, and that's part of that beautiful like weird experience of this RPG.
I will give you one example. The second adventure is great. And I want to talk a little bit about the structure eventually of these adventures, because they're really good. But the second adventure involves a bunch of temples that have been subverted through the influence of the Roach God. And one of the heads of there's like 4 different faction temples in this complex, has been converted. And now he's a priest of the Roach God. And throughout the whole thing, you kind of like the illustrations never show his face. And then you see his face, and he wears a mask of living cockroaches. And it's awful. Absolutely awful.
God, why?
And it's
I
just,
can't see it.
You haven't even seen it yet.
Oh, but I see it in my brain.
And all of this horror is supported in the text. It's just that Munchau's illustrations are right there, and you can't avoid them the way that you can kind of like Zedek's prose is very poetic, and while it does also make me wince in specific ways often, I can kind of like slither around and like avoid like really engaging with the text in a way that I cannot avoid Munchau's illustrations.
Oh man,
the funny thing is, it's a really beautiful book. It's bound in yellow, has like a really nice like kind of cloth binding. Looks like a very kind of old-fashioned book, really nice paper stock. There's illustrations out the wazoo. There's just so many of them. I just generally appreciate his style. It's very detailed, very realistic. Not printed in black, which
really,
yeah, it's like a light gray, or maybe even like a sepia, which I find gives it sort of a warmth and intimacy, which works against you when you see something like the Roach Priest.
Yeah.
So the structure of the adventures is cool in that everything that I've read, I've not read all of it, but I've read the majority of the book, and it's arranged in a similar way as to how I'm writing this stuff for the West Marches game. It's just a bunch of facts, and they're collected in a readable way where you can interact with these facts in a way that makes sense, and I can interface with them and use them. But the structure of the adventures is really just a long list of facts. It tells you get facts about the setting, you get facts about the NPCs, you get facts about the various locales that the players will explore, what they might find there. But what you don't get is any kind of insight into how plot might unfold. All of that, I feel, through this approach is encouraged to happen organically. The players kind of come on the scene, they do stuff. The GM uses that stuff and the facts to figure out how the world reacts to them. And then the story happens organically around them. Like the agents of the Roach God obviously have agendas, but how they apply those agendas is never clearly stated. And not stating it leaves it open to anything, because if I go into it and I have a really firm idea about what this monstrous centipede crossed with a cockroach is trying to do, I'm going to get locked in, right? Whereas if the players are kind of like really going at it and doing interesting stuff, I could react to them in a way that it appears that the thing is sort of anticipating their movements. You know what I mean? By reacting, you can kind of, to use the wrestling term, kayfabe it.
Yep.
Where it feels like there's this crazy story, this plot that you're being drawn into, when really the story is reacting to your inputs. And I think everything that I've read in the book is really keyed to that kind of play style. And I think that's really interesting. And I think that it's a really effective way to write. This is like gold standard stuff. Like, I've thought for a while that the Thousand Islands was one of the most important things that has really been worked on in the last few years in the tabletop role-playing scene. And I think that Reach of the Roach God is definitely, like, if there was any doubt that this stuff is important, I feel like this book is like everybody should check this book out and just see how they approach what is essentially an older form of play in a new and exciting and extremely different way.
Well, first up, Stu, I want to commend you on your correct and proper usage of the term kayfabe. You nailed it. Two, I think the whole concept here is very interesting. I think that there is always that moment when you have something that would be considered system agnostic to be unuser friendly, and also inartistic in the way that you're trying to just put something across just to fit it or make the hole big enough that whatever kind of play style you want to use can fit inside of it.
Yeah.
And I think that system agnostic and actual usability are not mutually exclusive in a lot of cases.
Mm-hmm.
Here, it does sound like a nice, perfect pairing of the two. And also, it, to me, feels like an energy that encourages stepping outside of the comfort zone in the box of even playing something that would be system agnostic with whatever system you're going to play with, because the ideas are expansive and very, very exciting sounding.
Yeah, let me read you how they encode character information, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like there's no stats, so you have to kind of like get this stuff through the pros. So they have a little system here. So roach soldiers, right? They're listed as ordinary, frail, polearm craft, flying, abducting, chitin machetes, chitin back. So the first word describes the power this creature wields in the world. Ordinary is just like common folk. There's extraordinary, powerful, and overwhelming. Overwhelming is reserved for something like a god. The second word describes their health. There's only two. It's frail or hale. Roach soldiers are frail. That's good. So you know that they have, like, in D&D terms, like 1 or 2 hit dice, maybe. Okay. The third sentence is a list of 3 skills that they're expert at. So again, roach soldier is polearm craft. So they use polearms, flying, and abducting. So they're good at flying in the air and abducting things. And that gives you like a whole bunch of implied skill sets, right? The fourth word describes the creature's attack, which is machetes. And then fifth word, the fifth sentence of the list is a list of all of the creature's defenses or armor. Bug shell, is probably softer than steel. Everything is encoded this way in sometimes evocative language, but it really, at least in terms of like my fluency with Dungeons and Dragons, I'm kind of translating this stuff on the fly pretty rapidly. I don't think that there's that much difficulty in kind of putting this into play which is different, I think, from a lot of agnostic stuff that I've read. I like the idea of agnostic stuff, but when it comes to wanting to like really translate it to play, I often have a little bit of hesitance because I'd rather just have the thing laid out for me.
Fair enough.
You know, I just think that this is it's a real game changer. I think that this is like super, like there's just so much here. I already thought that with just the approach to world building, but now we're seeing it in the way that they're approaching the framework of adventure and play, you know?
It's very cool, Stu. It's very cool. Do you have any final thoughts on Reach of the Roach God?
I do. I haven't talked nearly enough about Zedek's writing. I think that you should just read Zedek's writing, and it sort of becomes obvious why I enjoy his writing. There's a lyrical quality to it. He definitely manages to be evocative with the use of very few words, which means he's choosing words that are very specific. Like it's just really well written. There's a lot of craft here. One of my favorite things is that he often uses sort of modern turns of phrases to explain what you're seeing in the game, something that I do accidentally all the time because I live in the world that I like. Last night in my West Marches game, they saw a big white monster in front of a gray sky, so I was just like, you know how sometimes when a storm blows in and you're near like a big white church, and that white church just looks like the steeple looks like fire on, it's like so blindingly bright white because it's got that gray background, and everybody's like, oh yeah, totally. I was like, it looks like that. And they're like, oh man, you know, like, it's just, it breaks the illusion. But I think that it's such an effective way of conveying what you're seeing, that it's worth the momentary lifting of the illusion.
Love it.
He does that a lot. And he does that in ways that I find are almost always gratifying.
See, that's something I wish that more people would do in their RPGs is incorporate prose and incorporate things of that nature, because I want to believe that it'll be a more enjoyable reading experience for the person who runs it, or just for the person who buys it to put on their shelf, because no shade, you know, you use RPGs the way that you want to use them. But, you know, I think there is a genuine appeal to be able to, even if you're not going to run it, or again, if you get it, and you know, Lord only knows when you get people to the table, like you at least get some pleasure out of it. You don't have to wait to enjoy it for other people to come around. You can just go, oh, that was a delightful read. I gave a book to a buddy of mine, and I was like, hey, if you don't play the game, because I know you're not really into RPGs, that's fine. I was like, but read the gray boxes. The gray boxes will tell you the whole story, and the story is really good and worth reading. And I think I want to see more of that in RPGs, and that's my final thought.
Yeah, I do want to add real quick that there is a cool method for creating tunnel and cave layouts. By the way, this game is so much of it is about exploring underground spaces. The maps for those spaces are fantastic, and the methodology that they describe for creating new subterranean spaces involves string and action figures. I didn't really expect to flip through the book and find Spider-Man and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in it.
That's amazing.
But they're there, and to see, it's the same idea as like using ice in a parking lot as the basis of your fantasy map, right? Like you lay out a bunch of action figures, you kind of connect them with strings so that like those are tunnels between the chambers that these things will become. And it's cool to see that transformation in the art. A little bit of the philosophy underneath that underlies that kind of cavern building method is a good example of Zedek's prose. The gods fucked and fought, they danced and they died. Arrange your large figures and medium figures in poses of death and sorrow. Each should touch at least one other figure. More is better. Imagine them rotting, leaving cavities where their bodies once laid. So are the earth at its passages laid.
Jesus Christ.
Right? And then you turn the page and like all the action figures have been converted into like this 2-page spread of like, it's just awesome because like you can see the caverns, but you can also feel the mythology that builds that world, and it's so good. And the whole book is like that. Every page is just a delight.
I love it. I love it. So this was another amazing episode of the Vintage RPG Podcast. Stu, where can people find you on the internet?
They could find me on Instagram at Vintage RPG as a one of those bizarre quirks of fate. I did all of my posts for this year last year, and we have lined up next week's posts are about the balance of the Thousand Island zines. and I finished it with the sketchbook zine, but I'm going to move that, and I'm going to insert Reach of the Roach God so you guys can take a look at the art, and so I can put some more of my thoughts down into actual words instead of like talking about them.
How serendipitous.
Yeah.
And speaking of finding us on the internet, we do have a Patreon, patreon.com/vintagerpg. I'm jumping ahead of telling you where to find me because you know I don't post that much anyway. But on the Patreon, you get early release episodes at some point on Friday, occasionally on Saturday, depending on how late in the week we record the episode. Right now, we are recording this on Thursday. You get a behind-the-scenes look at Stu's book, which is called
Monsters, Aliens, and Holes in the Ground, a guide to tabletop role-playing games from Dungeons and Dragons to Mothership. There is a full chapter on Thousand Islands in there.
And you can pre-order the book now. You find links. We'll put them places.
Yes.
We also have a behind-the-scenes look at 3-2-1 Action, which is my RPG. We also run games for our patrons. I just ran a banging Cthulhu adventure about a week or so ago. I'm gearing up to put in the call to action to see who's available for the next Cthulhu game I'm going to run in a couple weeks. And then we're going to see what game I'm going to run after that. We'll do a poll. Stu is running West Marches at a certain tier. And you made your first kills the other night, didn't you?
I did. Last night, the group just found themselves in the midst of a really bad random encounter. It was 5 first-level OSE characters versus 3 manticores. And those 3 manticores ate well.
And they were the right kind of manticores because they didn't have wings.
Correct.
I love it. So yeah, come roll dice with us. We'd love to get on the virtual table with you and have some fun. Patreon.com/vintagerpg. You can find me across the internet at John McGuire RPG, Instagram, Twitter, the TikTok. I'm on the Substack now. I'll post when I post. I've been actually posting more though on Instagram. I've been like leaving the house and doing stuff. I saw a hot dog band play the other day. It was pretty awesome. If you backed Devil in New Jersey, we are just waiting for the copies to come back from Mix'em. They're going to be shipping those out. If you backed the Holiday Action Double Feature for 3-2-1 Action, check your inbox. We've sent out the PDFs for Kevin Saves Christmas. Hard Times in the Back Now to be coming soon. And if you like the show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Your reviews really do help other listeners to find us. And if you really like the show, want to become a patron, just rewind back to what I told you about the Patreon just about a minute ago because I'm going out of order. So this was another amazing episode of the Vintage RPG Podcast. For Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor. Take care.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dego West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.